All right, so we're doing section 7.4 and we're continuing it. So this is part 2. So we need to combine these two fractions. We're going to add them. So we first need the lowest common denominator. So if you look carefully, neither of these two denominators are going to factor. So we don't have to worry about that. So now what do we have to have in our lowest common denominator? Well, we're going to need a 7. We're going to need an x, and we're going to need an x plus 1. All of that has to be part of our common denominator. Now, this doesn't look so bad, but that's important that you see that these are separate factors. So you need both a 7 and an x in your lowest common denominator, as well as the single factor x plus 1. All right, so now our job is to get both of the fractions so they're over that lowest common denominator. So we're going to take the first fraction and we're going to rewrite it. Look at the denominator. Look at my lowest common denominator that I want it to be. What am I missing? What needs to be multiplied in there? Well, you can see I need an x plus 1. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by x plus 1. Plus, let's rewrite the second fraction. Again, I want this denominator to look like this. So what's missing? Well, I need both the 7 and the x. So now I have 5 times x plus 1 plus 2 times 7x. And that's all over my common denominator. And again, you can distribute in this step. It doesn't matter. I just did an additional step. So if I go ahead and distribute, I'm going to get 5x plus 5 plus 2 times 7x is just 14x. And that's all over the common denominator. And finally, if I combine like terms, I'm going to get 19x plus 5 over that common denominator. Can I do anything to factor this numerator? Any GCF? Nope. So that is our final answer. All right, let's go into the second page. Hopefully you're getting the, let me try. Hopefully you're getting the idea here. So let's go ahead and let's do C. Why don't you go ahead, maybe pause and factor the denominators. Okay, so if you factored the denominators, you can see the first one factors into x plus 4 times x minus 4. It's a difference of squares. Now, when you factored this second denominator, you should have gotten x plus 4 squared. Don't leave it as x plus 4 times x plus 4. Write it as a perfect square. Because now when I find my lowest common denominator, think of how we do this. So it needs an x plus 4. It needs an x minus 4. And then remember, you take the highest exponent that appears on any one. Bam, my x plus 4 needs an exponent of 2. That is my lowest common denominator. You may not see that if you left it as x plus 4 times x plus 4. All right, so here we go. Let's rewrite the first fraction. X plus 4 times x minus 4 in the denominator. Now remember, we want this denominator to look like my lowest common denominator. What's missing? Well, the x plus 4. So I need to multiply top and bottom by x plus 4. Let's go ahead and let's rewrite the second fraction. And again, I need this denominator to look like my lowest common denominator. What's missing? We're missing the x minus 4. So why don't we go ahead and let's distribute, because now it's time to multiply out the numerators. So 2x times x plus 4 is going to be 2x squared plus 8x. And that's over my common denominator of x plus 4 squared times x minus 4. Minus, let's distribute the 3 into the x minus 4. So it's going to be 3x minus 12 all over x plus 4 squared times x minus 4. Now again, since it's subtraction, you're going to have to distribute through the negative 1, so this turns to addition, and then it's minus 3x and plus 12. So if I go ahead and combine the numerators, I'm going to get 2x squared plus 5x. I just combine these, and then plus 12 over x plus 4 squared times x minus 4. So now the question is, does this top, does it factor? You can try from now to the cows come home. It is not going to factor for you. So we can go ahead, and that is our final answer. Now look at D. So D, notice how the denominators are not the same. So remember how I told you that you can go ahead and you can factor a negative 1 out of either one of these denominators. It doesn't matter which one. And when you do that, then you're going to have a common denominator, because factoring out a negative 1 from a subtraction problem flips it. So why don't we go ahead and let's factor it out of this first one. Now remember what I did in our previous section. When I factored out the negative 1, remember I told you what we can do with that negative 1 that we factor out of the bottom is we can just put it in the top. So that is going to make this negative 8 over 7y minus 3. So once again, let's talk about what I just did. I factored a negative 1 out of the denominator. So think of it this way. If I factor a negative 1 out of here, it changes both of those signs. And then I just took that negative 1 and I put it up with the 8 to make it a negative 8. That's all I did. There are other ways to do this. So now let's look what I have. I have a common denominator, and I have negative 8 minus 2, which is negative 10 over 7y minus 3. And since nothing cancels, we're done. Now, you don't have to write this in your notes, but let me just quick show you. Let's say I had chosen to factor the negative 1 out of here. Well, if I factor the negative 1 out of the bottom here, make that a negative 2, and that changes this to 3 minus 7y. So if you think about it, my answer would be 8 minus negative 2, which is 10, over 3 minus 7y. And you might look and say, but wait a minute, these are not the same. Absolutely, these two answers mean the same thing. Because if I were to take and factor out a negative 1 from this denominator, that would make this 7y minus 3. And if I were to just take that negative 1 and make, instead of the negative 1 down here, make it a negative 10, bam, there I am. So those answers may not look exactly the same, but they mean the same thing. All right, I would like you to shut off the video, and we're going to do it in steps. The first thing I want you to do is to factor each of the denominators for E. Go ahead and do that, and then come back. So if you're back, if I go ahead and factor these denominators, I can take an r out of my first denominator as a greatest common factor. For my second fraction, I can take an r out of that as well, which would leave me with r plus 2. And then for my third fraction. That's a trinomial, so I'm going to backwards FOIL. I'm going to have an R and an R. And what multiplies together to get -2 and adds together to get a +1? It's going to be +2 and -1. So now that it's all factored, why don't you guys go ahead, pause me, and find the LCD. Okay, so what is the LCD if you're back? Well, if we look at everything, I need an R. What's the next thing I need? If I just go down the row, I need an R minus 1. I don't need this R because I already have one, but I need an R plus 2. I don't need this R at plus 2 because I already have one. I don't need this R minus 1 because I already have one. So there's my LCD. So if we rewrite the first fraction, and again, I need to make this denominator look like this. What am I missing? Well, I'm missing the R plus 2. So multiply top and bottom by R plus 2. Let's go ahead and rewrite the second fraction. Again, what am I missing that makes this denominator look like my LCD? I'm missing the R minus 1. Minus, and I'm going to go over into this one, but that's okay. I've got plenty of room. If I go 1 over R plus 2 times R minus 1, making this denominator look like my LCD, I'm simply missing an R. So that takes a lot of work to write that step, but it helps so much. So let's go ahead and let's multiply out our numerator. So if I take 4 and multiply it by R plus 2, I'm going to get 4R plus 8 plus, now let's do this one, 6R minus 6, and then minus 1 times R, which is simply R. And that's going to go over my LCD, which I know is R times R minus 1 times R plus 2. Let's combine our like terms. Well, 4R plus 6R is 10R minus R is 9R. Then we have 8 minus 6, which is plus 2, over my LCD. This does not factor. There's my answer. All right, now I kind of went into, if I go up to F, I kind of went into that space. So I'm going to kind of do that. So the first thing you want to realize is this is really 2 over 1. So what is my lowest common denominator? Well, my lowest common denominator is simply x plus 5. So if I rewrite this first fraction, and if I need to make this denominator look like this, what do I have to multiply top and bottom by? Well, I have to multiply it by x plus 5. And if I go ahead and rewrite the second fraction, it's already over the common denominator, so I don't have to worry about it. So now let's go ahead and let's multiply by distributing through this 2. So I'm going to have 2x plus 10 plus the x from the numerator of the second fraction all over my common denominator. And then combining like terms, you're going to have 3x plus 10 over my common denominator of x plus 5. Does this factor in any way to be able to cancel? It doesn't. Here is your final answer. And there's 7-4.